I previously mentioned one of those parties at the helm of this conflict alongside Iran is Saudi Arabia, which, along with the United Arab Emirates, has conducted multiple airstrikes on Yemeni soil, killing thousands of civilians. Yet, the kingdom earlier this year pledged to donate $1.5 billion in humanitarian assistance to the war-torn country. And to speak about that, we're joined by His Excellency Dr. Abdullah Al Rabia, who's the Supervisor General of the King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center, also known as KS Relief. Thank you so much for joining us here on Middle East Matters, Your Excellency.
Well, I'm happy to be with you, Sanam, and looking forward for the interview.
Now, to date, KS Relief has implemented more than 270 humanitarian projects inside Yemen. Can you talk us through some of these programs?
Absolutely. As you have noted, Saudi Arabia is one of the top donors and supporters for the Yemeni people. Through KS Relief, we have been actually present in every region in Yemen, irrespective of who controls that region. And more than 277 projects has been executed in Yemen in areas of food security, health, supporting also communities, supporting IDPs, and also supporting refugees of Yemen in Djibouti and in Somalia. So many projects that are based on the priorities of the UN.
Now, KS Relief, which is directly funded by the Saudi Kingdom, as you just mentioned, coordinates some of its aid efforts through the United Nations. But most recently, we had a report from the UN which claimed that the actions of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, quote, could amount to war crimes. Do you think a finding like this could somehow hamper your efforts inside Yemen, or certainly your collaboration with the United Nations?
I don't think so. I think our history with the UN is for decades, and also our history with helping Yemenis goes back for decades. I mean, we do appreciate any report that comes, but also it has to be investigated and studied to be sure that how accurate we are talking about the details of the report. As you know, and I know, Saudi Arabia means no harm to the Yemeni people, and we are there to help and actually alleviate the suffering of Yemeni people in all regions of Yemen.
You just mentioned that Saudi Arabia doesn't mean any harm to the Yemeni people, but for critics of the conflict, there's a very basic, rudimentary question. Why not stop the war? So what's at the source of this suffering, as opposed to invest so much money and so many resources in trying to help the victims?
Well, Sanam, all of those who are involved in the peace process in Yemen know well that Saudi Arabia has been, even before the conflict, pushing for actually a peaceful resolution to this conflict. From even before the conflict, during the conflict, until today, Saudi Arabia wants to see an end to this conflict according to the UN resolutions, according to the GCC initiatives, and according to the Yemeni national dialogue outcome. So we hope to see the end today before tomorrow.
Now, I know your capacity, Your Excellency, deals with certainly the humanitarian angle, but do you foresee some real negotiations between certainly the big players like Saudi Arabia and Iran at any point in the future?
Well, Saudi Arabia always called for peace and stability in the region. We want to see the region peaceful and stable. Iran has intervened with many countries in the region and actually going in the internal affairs of those countries. We hope that Iran will back off and look for the stability of the region. Once the leaders of Iran look for the stability of the region, this is what Saudi Arabia and the international community looks for. We hope to see a stable region that brings peace and stability for the people living in every country in the region.
I want to focus on one incident that happened recently concerning the victims. Of course, Your Excellency, as you're aware, mistakes are made in war. And we heard from a report that, and this is something that the Saudi-led coalition has actually acknowledged, that errors were made when there was an airstrike on a school bus in the country. My question for you is, in scenarios like that, when there's a real sense of accountability, just what role can or does your organization KS Relief play?
Well, it's a good question. We always coordinate with the coalition. We coordinate with the EHOC, with the UN, to ensure that the protection of civilians. And that's why the coordination between the coalition, OCHA, and KS Relief, there is more than 70,000 non-strike zones in Yemen, where there is potential civilians in those areas. All the important regions in Yemen that contain either civilians or important buildings that are protected from any strikes. However, Saudi Arabia does not shy from investigating any incident that happens to ensure that if there are mistakes, to prevent them from happening in the future. We hope that the other party will have the courage also to present their mistakes and be vocal about it and transparent like Saudi Arabia and the coalition.
Dr. Rabia, very briefly and lastly, I think our viewers would find it interesting because of Saudi Arabia's involvement in the conflict that the country is actually hosting over 500,000 refugees from Yemen. What is the selection process like? Do they have to be supporters of the internationally recognized government which is backed by Riyadh?
Sanam, Saudi Arabia does not differentiate between sectors of society of Yemen. That's why we are helping people in Saada, Hajjah, Umran, which are the Houthi regions. As a matter of fact, we are actually operating.
Do you have Houthi refugees living in Saudi Arabia?
We don't even ask about what sector they are. As long as they are in need and they cross the borders, they go. But we pay attention for the weaker parts of the society, which are women and children. We pay attention to them, and that's why all of our projects are focusing on women and children. And that's why also we are the only organization which is rehabilitating children who have been taken by the Houthis as armed soldiers. And we hope that all children who have been subjected to the conflict will be rehabilitated through our program.
On that note, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Dr. Abdullah Al Rabia, Your Excellency, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Middle East Matters.
Thank you, Sana.